Welcome to Litigation Nation. I'm your host, Jack Sanker, here with my co-host, Danessa Watkins. This is the show where we talk about some of the most important and interesting legal stories of the past couple of weeks. Danessa, what do you have today?
Today I'm going to cover a newly filed defamation lawsuit against John Oliver for an episode of Last Week Tonight on HBO that touched on the state of Medicaid in our country. And then I want to quickly discuss the recent presidential executive orders that have been issued against law firms and the amicus curiae brief that was filed in support of some of those law firms.
Oh boy. I'm going to be talking a bit about tariffs and specifically how at the state level some of the governors are trying to work with and or work around the new tariffs that are now infamous at this point. We're going to be talking about the Charter of Rhode Island from 1663. We'll be talking about unilateral free trade deals between California and China. And then in Illinois here, maybe some attempts at sneaking some imported goods through the duty-free zones at the airport.
Sounds very Illinois.
Yeah. All of that and more, here's what you need to know.
John Oliver, the host of Last Week Tonight, which is a show on HBO, was recently sued for defamation in federal court in the Southern District of New York. Now, this lawsuit relates to a show that aired on April 14th, 2024, so almost exactly a year ago, which focused on Medicaid, including healthcare companies' cost-cutting measures and the toll that was taking on patients across various states. So more specifically, according to the lawsuit, Oliver represented to his audience, quote, there was a nearly 900% increase in members being illegally denied services or care, and some of the cost cutting was absolutely enraging, end quote. Oliver then went on to explain the role of managed care organizations, or MCOs, within the healthcare system and stated, quote, but the most infuriating thing about MCOs is that, as with so many players in our for-profit healthcare system, they are incentivized to cut costs at the expense of necessary care. Because MCOs get paid a set monthly amount per person, meaning they get a fixed rate, so their profit is whatever they don't spend on patients, and you can probably see where this is going, end quote. In the show, John Oliver then shared a news segment from a 2018 broadcast that featured a cerebral palsy patient in Iowa whose care was specifically impacted by the MCO involvement in the state. And one of the effects was that his daily nursing care visits were cut. So, as his mom explained, for 6 weeks, this poor man went through or went without the in-home bathing and diaper changing that he had received for years. And she simply couldn't afford to pay for the nursing care anymore. So now comes the alleged defamatory portion of the show. After showing that news clip, John Oliver states, quote, look, that's Lewis's situation. Obviously, it's maddening. And it doesn't get any better when you hear a doctor at AmeriHealth, the CMO that took over in Iowa, explaining in a hearing about a similar patient just what the corporate thinking was about the necessity of keeping people clean, end quote. And then he plays this snip of Dr. Morley, who is the plaintiff in this case. Now, Dr. Morley, at the time in 2017, he was the head of the AmeriHealth, which was the CMO that had taken over in Iowa. So his role was essentially to oversee Medicaid, make sure that they were following regulations, not providing services or care that didn't fall within, I guess, the parameters that were being set. Mm-hmm. So he was a high-ranking position. He was the decision maker. So he, as part of his duties, often had to testify at these hearings. So this was taken from one of those administrative hearings. This is the clip that was played on Last Week Tonight. Quote, people have bowel movements every day where they don't completely clean themselves, and we don't fuss over them too much. People are allowed to be dirty. You know, I would allow him to be a little dirty for a couple of days, end quote.
Okay.
So they played the audio clip and then showed the words, printed on the screen. But they do show on the screen that there is a part where it says people are allowed to be dirty, ... So it's in ellipses. So you understand that it's, there was something else there before the next comment, which is I would allow him to be a little dirty for a couple of days. So I guess the argument that John Oliver would make in this case is the viewer understands this is not, a verbatim, or it is a verbatim quote, but there's some missing pieces in there.
Sure.
So John Oliver goes on to tell his audience that when he first heard this testimony from Dr. Morley, he thought this has to be taken out of context. But then he conveys to his audience that he reviewed the full testimony at the hearing, and this was, in fact, what Dr. Morley said and what he meant. So
that's his opinion, though.
It's his opinion, but this is where fact versus opinion and defamation gets a little tricky.
I'm learning so much from you.
Because he's saying I actually reviewed this hearing in full. So while he's providing his opinion, he's providing the facts for which the opinion is based, which then can cross the line into this could be potentially defamatory. So the issues that Dr. Morley takes with this are that he claims his words were both manipulated and misrepresented. So he made this bowel movement comment in regards to a hypothetical average person who is independently mobile and can transfer to the toilet by themselves. He was not referring to someone like the individual with cerebral palsy that was shown in the news clip who is in a wheelchair, unable to care for his basic ADLs, basic needs.
Basic ADLs, by the way, what is that?
Activities of daily living.
There we go.
So, yeah.
Classic lawyer.
I know, sorry. Washing, brushing your teeth, just basic caring for yourself.
I asked for the sake of the audience, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. So apparently, well, according to the complaint anyways, last week tonight, or John Oliver, did not inform the audience of the context of Morley's comments. So the way that they placed them, like I said, was after this image and this, very emotionally driven, statements by this mother of this child who wasn't getting the care he needed. And then not only that, but John Oliver announced Morley's clip as testimony referring to, quote, a similar patient. So he kind of set this stage for where Morley's testimony should fit in that, according to Dr. Morley, was completely inaccurate. I did read the full quote, and yeah, it's misleading, the way that they portray it, for sure.
I mean, I don't want to jump ahead, but I mean, like, taking ththings out of context and putting them on, news shows or like late night shows. I mean, that's, as American as apple pie, right?
Yeah.
It goes back forever.
Yeah, so you saw exactly where I was going with this.
Okay.
So there are obviously First Amendment protections for satire and parody, and comedians in our country, probably more than anywhere else in the world, have a lot of freedom, to pursue their craft. So I will say, when I saw the news headlines for this one, my initial thought was, oh, that's an easy motion to dismiss.
Sure.
But having reviewed the complaint, having watched the clip, I do think that John Oliver could have some problems here. Like I said, he's representing to the audience that he reviewed the full hearing. So he's essentially saying everything I've told you and how I portrayed this statement is absolutely the way it was portrayed at the hearing.
Yeah.
And that's not accurate. There's also some allegations in the complaint that I guess someone from the show at some point reached out to Dr. Morley. I don't know who reached out first to one another, but it was prior to the show airing. And Dr. Morley's representative specifically asked, did you review this hearing in its entirety? And the response from the show was, yes, we did. Well, the testimony is over 3 hours long. So I think right off the bat, they were a little bit like, okay, did John Oliver really sit and read this? Probably not. But, we can trust that editors of an HBO show are going to do their due diligence. I mean,
the comedy writers, though,
True. But either way, that's what they represented, and then went ahead and broadcast the show anyways. So there is also a claim against the show's producers saying that based on their representations, they reviewed the full hearing. Had they actually done that, they would have understood that this was not Dr. Morley's intent, and yet they portrayed it that way anyways. So that's the intentional act. And I'd say the way that they portrayed this is per se defamatory. It's a want of integrity against Dr. Morley in performing his employment duties, and it also certainly prejudices him in his profession.
He's not a public figure, at least not till now.
So that's an interesting question because there could be an argument that he's a limited purpose public figure. He's testifying publicly at a hearing, voluntarily thrusting himself into this debate about a very public issue.
That's very interesting.
So
voluntarily, he was not employed, or I'm sorry, I missed it.
No, he was at the time that he testified at this hearing.
Okay.
But
he might have been compelled to testify then, or required to.
Per his duties, yeah. That's interesting. But either way, he was definitely participating in a hearing about an issue of public concern. So that could, that would be an interesting argument for the defense to say that he has to prove actual malice.
Oh, and also if he was testifying as like a corporate rep rather than in his personal capacity, is he speaking or is the company speaking?
True.
I wonder if you could, I don't know how that plays with First Amendment stuff, but
yeah.
I wonder if that's
an interesting, argument too. But maybe he did anticipate that defense, which is why he included those facts about the network saying, yes, we reviewed the full hearing, because that would show, if you did review the full hearing, then you would know that you're portraying him poorly, or not even poorly, but incorrectly.
Yeah. It's also, I don't know. It's this. I'm not going to add anything helpful here that from a legal perspective, other than to take someone's testimony and twist it around and characterize it however you want is also an American tradition. That's what we do as litigators. So, this is not happening in a courtroom, so that's different. But I think, I don't know. I'd be interested. This one is particularly interesting because it's courtroom testimony. It's not a quote from a newspaper.
Yeah. I think it's an administrative hearing, but quasi-judicial sort of situation. But
because that happens all the time, in trial, right? Someone gets up in an argument and says, well, so-and-so witness said this. No, they didn't. They didn't.
Right.
They literally didn't say that. That's not what the transcript says. That's not a fair reading of the transcript, whatever. And, it's...
But that's privilege because you're within a judicial setting. I don't know. And, the question is, right, what is the reasonable viewer think? And so if you're watching John Oliver, you understand, the nature of the type of show it is. You're going to, take everything with a grain of salt to some extent. To me, the fact that works most against him is him saying, look, guys, I'm not going to show you the full clip. I reviewed the full hearing, and I'm telling you right now, this is what he said, this is what he meant. So he kind of went that extra step, know? And the plaintiff did include in his complaint snips of comments on YouTube where you can view this episode. The episode itself garnered nearly 3.5 million views, and the comments do show that people generally believe that Dr. Morley thinks it's okay for an immobile patient to sit in a dirty diaper for a few days.
That's also not flattering even under his facts, by the way. He's no, in context, I would let someone, that's not a flattering thing for him to talk about, even in his context, by the way. So I don't know. It's a weird statement in general. He's kind of just saying some people don't have good bathroom habits and they survive, you know. So, but yeah. And we have no duty to help them, But he did, I will say, having read the full statement that was snipped and clipped in certain ways, he does make clear that he in no way was applying that logic to someone who's obviously unable to care for themselves. Right.
So I do think it was kind of a gross misrepresentation.
I mean, the intent element here is like seems to be based on Oliver's statement that, you know, I read the transcript so you can trust me, right?
Yeah.
To what extent could he just say, "Oh, sorry, I misread it," then?
Do
you know what I mean?
Isn't this sort of like a ignorance of the law is no excuse kind of thing?
Well, but I mean, that would negate intent, though. If he was like, I literally did read the transcript, and I'm just too stupid to understand it, and then I went and talked about it.
I feel like that would go to a reasonable person standard. Like any reasonable person reading this would have understood that that is not what he meant to say.
I suppose. I mean, reasonable people aren't reading court transcripts, though, which can be like difficult to follow.
True.
You know.
True. So okay. Well, to give you like specifically what he says. So right before that quote, he says, this is Dr. Morley during his hearing testimony. In certain cases, yes, with the patient with significant comorbidities. Yeah, right?
Yeah.
Comorbidities. There we go. You would want to have someone wiping them and getting the feces off. So
well, that's good.
Yeah. So he does say, like, when we're talking about, for example, someone with cerebral palsy, yes, of course, you need to give that type of care.
Of course. In case you were
yeah,
wondering.
but then goes on, and yeah, we don't fuss about, you know, people who can take care of themselves and don't wipe well. Like, it's just, I don't know. The whole thing is a weird thing to say, but yeah, I don't know. He also brings up that the response from people on YouTube, or there's an increased likelihood that viewers would have believed that this was actually Dr. Morley's position on this, is because of how John Oliver allegedly feigned this outrage over the testimony.
Mm-hmm.
And he actually goes so far to say, quote, "Fuck that doctor with a rusty canoe. I hope he gets tetanus of the balls," end quote. So he definitely like goes off on Dr. Morley.
I mean, I've seen the show. He does that whole thing. He's like the type of person that like loves to abuse the word literally, you know, and which everyone does, but he like totally, you know, this is literally, figuratively, you know.
Okay, so yeah, I don't know. Maybe there would
But
be that argument that like his reasonable viewer understands him.
I mean, I don't know that either.
I don't know
how much
either.
credit you want to give to John Oliver viewers.
I don't want to. Sorry, John. I don't watch your show, so I can't comment on that. But yeah, I don't know. Well, this just got filed, so I would imagine there's going to be motions to dismiss coming. But yeah, kind of stay tuned and find out.
Well, and also those comments about I hope you get tetanus and everything also speaks to like malicious intent, right? Like he's definitely like, you know, not being super nice about this.
He's not being nice. However, I don't know that that's a basis for liability. So malice in this context would be that he knew what he was saying was false. It's not the, like, I intended to harm you. That type of malice would go to punitive damages.
Okay.
So, yeah, I don't know. But this is one of those, too, where, like, this show, in order to survive, kind of has to take a strong stance on this and not fold.
Yeah.
You know, they can't, if otherwise, like, they're going to get sued every show.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. I mean, or just settle with an NDA, which, right? I mean, that's the other anticlimactic outcome.
I don't know. I feel like ever since George Stephanopoulos' settlement with Trump, I feel like there's a lot of pressure on the entertainment industry to not settle, because that's just set such a crappy precedent.
Yeah, and there seems like to be more claimants willing to test those. You know, like I remember like way back in the first Trump administration, like every now and then he would say something, and I'm like, who told him about that? Like he was talking about, oh God, what was the case? It's like, is it U.S. v. Sullivan or? Am I getting that right? It's
that
like,
is a case. I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, it's like the like kind of quintessential libel case for like newspapers, like publishers' liability and things like that. Do I have that right?
New York Times.
Yeah.
For Sullivan, you mean?
New York Times for Sullivan. Sorry.
Yeah.
And like I remember Trump like very vividly being like, we should repeal that case, and I'm like, how do you know about that case?
Yeah.
That's such a weird thing for you to know about. But I kind of ever since that, I feel like there's like for a while he was on this like thing where he was like, we were going to roll back the libel laws. And, like, all this, so and that's like kind of been a, you know, like item like 100 on the list of things that's gotten weird. But like that's one of them for sure.
Yeah. It's interesting too because Trump's been on both sides of defamation cases, right? Like,
Yeah.
so with Stephanopoulos, like the law worked in his favor on defamation law, you know?
Yeah.
But then he's obviously lost big on the other side too. So, gosh, why is it like we're always 3 steps away from bringing up Trump at all times?
I know.
I didn't even think we were gonna go there, but
No, I'm sorry.
that's okay. What are we gonna do?
He's like Bizarro Forrest Gump, where he's just in everything, you know.
Yes.
He was there for everything.
Just shows up in Nam.
He was like, yeah, he met the president. He won the ping pong contest. He was like, yeah, it's, yes. Anyways.
Okay. Well, that's that.
All right.
We'll see what happens there.
So in that same vein of, we don't want to keep talking about Trump, but like, what are you going to do? We've mentioned tariffs on the show quite a bit. We've talked about from the legal perspective, like what's their basis, which is a statutory delegation of power from Congress to the president, and then which has to be invoked via like a declaration of national emergency, et cetera, et cetera. You can check back to some of our most recent episodes if you want to hear more about that. What I wanted to talk about today is how some of the different states are trying to address this, and if they even can, because by and large, a lot of like local politics, I would say, does not like tariffs, like at the local level, because you know you are a politician like in your district or in your town or whatever, and it's like some guy approaches you and is like, hey, my thing that I import that I either, you know, attach to my final product or that I buy or the thing that I sell is subject to retaliatory tariffs now. What the heck, man? Like, you know, to the extent that like tariffs, like good or bad, right or wrong, like whatever side you are on that politically, like the good part that, you know, proponents of this policy are saying will happen, we can all agree hasn't happened yet. So like as it stands, we're in the you know, you need to sacrifice for the long-term good. We're definitely in the sacrifice phase.
The early stages.
Yeah. So like locally, you know, it's not a popular thing. I'll put it like I've seen that in deep red districts and deep red politicians and obviously, you know, other places. It's not. And, you know, to the extent that people are willing to put up with it, it's like, you know, it's kind of a greater good argument or whatever. Anyways, politics aside, the reason I bring that up is because like at local levels, but at the state level, which we're going to talk about now, there are people that are just like, can we do something to get around this? And the answer for the most part is no. But I've got a couple of examples of some interesting ways that people are at least thinking about this. So in Rhode Island, there is a Rhode Island lawmaker which is proposing to create a free trade zone in the coastal state based on the powers that was granted to it, the state of Rhode Island, by King Charles II in 1663, that's the colonial charter that was signed by King Charles, which apparently delegates some amount of authority to the local colonial governor to like levy and administer taxation. So Delaware lawmaker Joseph McNamara wrote this week that, quote, our state has a long history of resisting unfair, authoritative trade mandates and taxes. One only has to reflect on our 252-year history to be reminded of the action that our early colonists took in 1772 when faced with an unlawful British vessel, unquote. And I love arcane legal stuff. Like I love old law that doesn't, you know, isn't applicable, but like people bring it up. That's why I love sovereign citizen stuff. Yeah, like, I love this stuff.
But I'm like waiting for New Hampshire to come forward.
Oh my God, they're probably chomping at the bit. I can't. I love that stuff. Yeah, when they're like, well, actually, we never ratified that amendment. So, and there's like every now and then you'll hear about like some states like, well, they finally ratified like the 14th Amendment. And you're like, what?
Yeah.
But I love that stuff. Anyways, there's by the way, this instance that he's talking about is he's talking about in 1772, a bunch of American colonists attacked a British ship, which was at the time, kind of ironically, assigned to patrol the waters around Delaware and make sure that import and tax rules for trade was being followed. and this boat got mobbed by a bunch of Rhode Islanders, and it was like one of the first instances of open hostility between the colonists and the British Crown leading up to the American Revolution. Anyways, so the question is, can Rhode Island invoke a neutral, tariff-free trade zone? One, and two, can it invoke its royal charter, which is from like 370 years ago at this point?
So interesting, huh?
Well, the answer is no to both.
Yeah, I mean, but what a unique argument.
Yeah, I
Creative.
mean, well, it's unique in that it's not good, but it's fun, and that's why we're covering it, and it's worth
Sorry, McNamara.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry, but what's fun is that it does. I had an excuse to like look this up, which is great, and technically Rhode Island didn't have a state constitution until 1842. And up until that point, they were more or less using the royal charter as their state constitution.
Interesting.
So the charter, which was by a king, in a country that we very famously broke ties with, and I don't know, folks, you heard about this, the American Revolution, but and that was like old at the time. I mean, so the last time that I think that it was being like used in Rhode Island was up until the 1840s.
Wow. Okay.
And which they finally then passed their own state constitution. But even at that point in time, it was like 200 years old.
Right.
So again, I just love when these like old arcane things get they stick around, and then you have to go back and try to reframe them for modern times or whatever. So like, it was actually like, I don't know that this specific taxation provision would have worked out in their favor, even if they had tried to create a free trade zone in the 1840s. I don't know. But the point is like, the charter was kind of around for longer than you think. Anyways, the answer to the question is Rhode Island can't just opt out of the U.S. Constitution and establish its own international and trade regulations. Those powers are specifically reserved for U.S. Congress, and like, not to get into the weeds on this, but if a state were to pass their own law regarding international tariffs, it would be, unconstitutional, one, and two, federally preempted by all of the federal tariff regulations that have been passed by Congress since then. So, sorry, Rhode Island.
A for effort, though.
Yeah, I mean, I love, again, get creative, get weird,
Get weird.
Like, let's see it. Let's see your royal charters.
Put it out there.
Let's see, like some secret Federalist paper that never got published. Like, why not? We are trying new things in this country right now.
Seriously, if there was ever a time.
Yeah, do it. We're all sovereign citizens now. California is, they're doing their own thing. Last week, Governor Gavin Newsom said, quote, "California leads the nation as the #1 state for agriculture and manufacturing. It's our workers, families, and farmers who stand to lose the most from the Trump tax hike and trade war. To our international partners, as the 5th largest economy in the world, the Golden State will remain a steady, reliable partner for generations to come, no matter the turbulence coming out of Washington. California is not Washington, D.C., unquote." And there was a statement that was put out by the governor's office, which said, quote, "With this announcement, Governor Newsom is directing his administration to identify collaborative opportunities with trading partners that protect California's economic interests, workers, manufacturers, and businesses, and the broader supply chains linked to the state's economy. The administration will explore ways to support job creation and innovation in industries reliant on cross-border trade, promote economic stability for businesses and workers impacted by federal trade disruptions, safeguard access to critical supplies such as construction materials needed for recovery efforts following the devastating Los Angeles firestorms," unquote. And during the Newsom administration, California apparently has signed on to 38 international agreements with 28 different foreign partners. I wasn't able to dig into that because I think like the source that I got, that bit of information was also from the state website, but like it's my understanding that the governor can't sign a binding agreement with a foreign country with respect to trade. Like, I think now we'll talk a bit about what Illinois has done, which is sign memorandums of understanding with other countries, where they basically say like this isn't law, this can't be enforced, but like here's how we're going to do this. Yeah. So I think that may be what they're referring to. Like, we're going to kind of like try to help each other out here. So California can't enter into trade agreements with foreign countries, but what I think that Newsom is getting at is, again, one of the creative ways that people are trying to, get some relief at the local and state levels is it could, for example, like offer tax incentives or like other goodies to companies, to foreign companies or to foreign held, assets or companies that do business in California, like in exchange for concessions on retaliatory tariffs, for example. So like, I'm making this up, but like, I think that California could give a state corporate tax break or state income tax break or all sorts of state tax breaks to, for example, Chinese companies in exchange for maybe China not targeting California industries that are so exposed to tariffs.
Oh, wow.
So
okay.
like, I know, for example, that China has one of the retaliatory tariffs is on like agricultural exports from the United States. And California is the largest agricultural exporter. So that's going to hit California hard. So like maybe that's a bargaining chip that they have with, Chinese held assets or Chinese companies, or they can do something at the state level so that maybe China says, we're going to ease off of agricultural tariffs as a whole because it hurts, California the most. And, we're trying to play nice with California, right?
Wow. So interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it encourages some pretty incoherent behavior from.
I know, I'm just waiting for the federal government to respond to that type of thing.
I mean, I think if it's within the sovereign powers of the state to say, we are not going to tax X, Y, Z thing, or you want to build this thing here, we're going to remove regulations on this permit, or and whatever business interest you have in the state, if the governor can tweak those things, which happen all the time. Like governors do this all the time to get to solicit business investments. They'll like a classic example is an NFL football stadium where they're like, we'll fund it via tax breaks for the next 50 years or whatever. So something like that maybe, and then say, if you do that, please don't tax our almonds at 300%. Sure. And then that's something. But you're going to see governors and representatives try to broker these little side deals, which is, I don't know.
I'm already foreseeing the federal government being you are, I don't know, this is going to affect our national security.
For sure.
So, especially with China.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
No, we want retaliatory tariffs on almonds.
Right.
We want those. So I don't know. But again, people, like I said, we're trying new things here, folks. We're this is the time. Our governor in Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, he's kind of openly saying that our agricultural sector here is going to just get crushed by this. Illinois is also a big agricultural producer. We have 900,000 people that work in the agriculture sector. He just the other day he was talking with reporters outside the State House in Springfield, and he's kicking around some interesting ideas too. He mentioned that they're looking into utilizing international foreign trade zones that already exist in the state to get around tariffs. And these, I looked up, exist in a couple of cities in Illinois: Chicago, Rockford, Savannah, Quad Cities, Decatur, Granite City, and Lawrenceville. And what is a foreign trade zone? Great question. Can't explain it super well. Not my area of law. But what a little bit I know is that it's a kind of they exist outside U.S. Customs territory and to some extent outside of U.S. Customs jurisdiction, and allow for a more free flow of goods in and out. I basically think it's a little carve out and I guess I would assume has to be designated by the federal government previously to allow for, I would assume, certain specific and maybe local trade relations to get around the broader framework of federal tariffs. So okay, Chicago has an international port, for example. People don't know that. But we have an international port which does do some amount of international shipping. By international, I mean Canada. But that's not and that is part of one of these foreign trade zones. And I don't exactly know if that means that goods that come through there are not tariffed. I don't exactly know that. But I've done a little bit of research on this, and I've put out some notes to some of the trade attorneys at our firm that do this type of thing, and I'm kind of pending a response for that. But as I understand it, there's like these international entry points into the state, some of which are designated within some of our airports, like O'Hare. It's not the duty-free zone, which is what I thought originally. I was like, the duty-free zone, we should just bring everything through there.
Right.
Like, it doesn't work that way at all. But I was like, just bring it right through the liquor store that they don't tax you.
Fix.
Yeah, no, it's...
Grab some cigarettes on the way.
Exactly. Buy some perfume. But no, that's not it. And I was like, wow, this is such a good idea. And it's not that. But there are international free trade zones within the airports. And there's obviously a commercial like shipping of items into the state of Illinois, like through our airports, our international airports in particular. So, I don't know. I think that, and I think that Pritzker is like probably going to look to leverage those points of entry as much as he can. I think it would be like hilarious if we just started like exporting like, millions of pounds of raw beef through Midway. I don't know if that's like quite feasible, but at every turn it seems like everyone's just looking to undermine these tariffs. And there's like if you skim the headlines too, it's like other states are lobbying for exemptions for their like hardest hit industries. I mean, every state is doing this. Is sending a governor or a senator or someone to talk to the White House and say like, great job, sir. We love your tariffs, but if you could maybe ease up on, wheat, like that would be great for my constituents. Lobbyists for private companies are doing the same thing. It's all those things. I mean, it's created this weird environment where like, I think you're going to talk about this maybe in the next segment a little bit, but where people are, that are going to benefit the most are ones that have something to offer. In exchange for getting big government off their back.
Right.
And the states that can do that maybe will try to. I mean, I think they have that responsibility to their constituents to try to, and obviously lobbyists on behalf of corporations they have that as well. So we'll see. But the point is, all this stuff is like malleable and like it's all kind of in flux, and there's like multiple choke points, each of which is controlled by different people. I've thought more about international trade in the last 2 weeks than I have the entire sum of my life up until that point. But it will be interesting, and I have to think about this stuff because that's what my clients keep asking me about. So until further notice, I'm gonna be overly interested in trade regulation.
For those kind of like free zones, I was wondering if you came across anything regarding like Native American territories, because
that's a great idea too.
That's what came to mind for me first.
That's like, I feel like that's a plot of a movie.
I'm sure.
We're gonna launder stuff through the Native American reservations. That's like a Taylor Sheridan plot arc. If anyone watches like Yellowstone or whatever, like that's. And I want to say that was like a thing in the 80s in California where there was a Indian reservation, Native American reservation that was like someone had set up shop there, obviously casinos, but then like was I think like manufacturing firearms and trying to like get them around.
Yeah, no, I mean it definitely has happened in our lifetime. I have no sense of whether it's still happening, but I grew up with a girl who was 100% Mohawk, grew up on the reservation, and yeah, she told me some real stories about how their rivers were abused.
I mean, it would be so cool if the Native American reservations were like, hey, we're duty free, so like we're gonna just become the central trade hub of North America. Like,
yeah, let's talk about reparations. Let's
maybe Trump did reparations by accident.
Right. Okay. All right. We just figured it out.
There we go.
All right. I am decidedly keeping this short because I could probably spend 3 episodes going over this. But, this is one of those things we need to tread lightly on. And I, though, couldn't give up this platform and not use it to at least mention what's going on currently in our profession. So I think it's pretty well known now that the president has put out, I believe to date, 5 executive orders attacking law firms, some of the most prominent law firms in our country, to be exact. And when you read these executive orders, they're short, so I would actually highly suggest that you take a minute to just look them over. It is brash. It is undisguised retaliation for law firms that have represented interests that are opposed to the president. He puts it in plain black and white. You know, you represented this person. They acted against me, and that is part of this order and part of the reason why this order is coming down. No doubt the firms that are targeted are methodical. Not only have some of these firms represented Trump's enemies, but in attacking these highly profitable, prominent, nationally and internationally prominent institutions, the message is clear. To the middle-sized firms, the smaller firms, it's fall in line or you're next. And guess what? You probably can't afford to fight the federal government. We've unfortunately seen some law firms fold and give in to the will of the president. Most notably, a firm agreed to give $40 million in free legal work.
I believe that the number is now, and we could put a pin in this because I do want to talk about this with you towards the end here, but I believe the number now is that the administration has collected a pledge of $240 million worth of free legal counsel from these law firms.
In exchange for them not, following through on these executive orders, which include, in some cases, doing full-blown investigations into these firms, requiring them to produce records, personnel records, client lists, DEI initiative and stats that come from that, revoking security clearance.
Also, wasn't it floated banning from federal buildings?
Yep.
And does that include federal courthouses?
Ooh, good question.
Because that's I just can't practice law anymore.
Yeah, I can't imagine, but I don't know. I mean, perhaps. Yeah. I mean, these are so broadly worded that I think it's up for interpretation.
And a lot of federal office buildings, by the way, do house federal, administrative courts, administrative hearings.
Right.
Often, a random federal office building will also include a floor that has, ALJ hearing rooms, things like that. To say you're banned from all federal buildings might mean you can't go into the place where you practice law or where you represent your clients, physically. And then on top of that, as I understand, there's a shot across the bow of the clients of these firms.
Yes, that as well. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, my point was not necessarily in bringing this up to come down on those firms that have folded. It was more so to applaud my colleagues that have stood up and have said definitively, no, this is absolutely against our First Amendment rights, Sixth Amendment rights, Fifth Amendment rights. You are attacking every aspect of the separation of powers. Yeah, I mean, thank you to all of the firms, the attorneys, the deans of law schools, and just everyday people who are actually taking a stand very publicly and saying we cannot in any way, shape, or form allow this to continue. Just recently, so one of the firms that has stood up against this and actually filed a lawsuit and they got a preliminary injunction. They're now seeking a permanent injunction against the executive order. That's Perkins Coie. And on April 4th of 2025, 504 law firms from across the country filed and signed on to an amicus brief to support Perkins Coie's motion for summary judgment, where they're seeking a permanent injunction. And this is certainly the most organized pushback that we've seen to date. I just want to read one part of the argument that they filed. It says, the looming threat posed by the executive order at issue in this case and the others like it is not lost on anyone practicing law in this country today. Any controversial representation challenging actions of the current administration or even causes it disfavors now brings with it the risk of devastating retaliation. Whatever short-term advantage an administration may gain from exercising power in this way, the rule of law cannot endure in the climate of fear that such actions create. Our adversarial system depends on zealous advocates litigating each side of a case with equal vigor. That is how impartial judges arrive at just, informed decisions that vindicate the rule of law. In the same vein, it is a deeply held principle of the legal profession that everyone, no matter their actions or beliefs, is entitled to zealous advocacy on their behalf. The principle is so deeply ingrained that lawyers, going back to John Adams's defense of 8 British soldiers who perpetrated the Boston Massacre of 1770, consider it a core part of their professional obligation to take on representation of clients with whom they disagree, even vehemently.
John Adams.
John Adams, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Indeed, the courage of attorneys who take on unpopular clients has long made lawyerdom proud. End quote. Yeah, I don't know. Like I said, it's almost like I'm at a loss of words and I have too many words at the same time because it's just such an unbelievable attack on our profession and our judicial system that it's...
I mean, if I can say something without saying something,
Please.
it's the way that we wanted to cover this is not the way that we are.
Agreed.
Because of what that could mean in terms of repercussions.
Right.
Like, if you're like listening to this and debating whether like it's affecting how people talk and think about this issue, I'm telling you it does. It's happening. You're listening to it.
I was going to say we probably started discussing whether and how we would address this issue, 3-4 weeks ago?
Yeah.
And we've gone back and forth on it. And that, I will say for me personally, I mean, luckily, never have I had a point in my life or career where I've taken a second to second guess whether I should use my First Amendment right. Because the repercussions, not just on us, but on our institution, on our colleagues, on our, you know, it's real, on our clients. So the power of what's happening, I guess, can't be denied. And that's why I say I'm not coming down, or I don't want to come down on these law firms who have folded.
Yeah.
I don't agree with their decisions. But you know,
I mean, I don't either, but like, I hope that people understand, like, I could tell some anecdotes without giving anything away here. I've spoke to some people that are, let's just say, affected by this. And when the administration's, targets were set on them, they got nonstop calls from clients saying, sorry, we can't use you anymore. We can't be near this. Because
which was the intent.
Correct. Yeah. It's meant to just threaten. So the choice is like, do you take a stand on principle, or do you maybe bankrupt your company, which employs, thousands of people and whatever. And like, I don't know, say what you want about big law firms. I mean, they're they do pro bono and everything else, but like, it's not a charity for puppies. Like
they make real money.
Yeah. Yeah. And I understand people don't like lawyers. So also that, this isn't like, feel bad for us type of thing. What I'm really, people will figure it out. There's a lot of things going on. What's really bothering me.
Really grinding my gears.
What's up with these pro bono pledges?
Yeah.
And what are they for?
Right.
Because I understand it. When the administration, any administration, does something, politically not nice, and they have the DOJ, right? They have their lawyers and they have all those things. But then there's also unrelated things you can't use the DOJ for, like campaign things. Like your private campaign, the DOJ is not going to represent you.
Yeah.
Your individual lawsuits, DOJ, all those things like that.
Yeah.
And lawyer fees are expensive, and the people, in the White House and connected to the campaign there's been, God knows we've talked about it before, but they're very litigious and are the subject of many lawsuits. And then there is, what the administration wants to do, which often uses outside counsel for all sorts of things. That's what a lot of times what these people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you have the ability to turn away a case if you don't want it for really any reason other than non-discriminatory reasons. But
Right.
you could just say, I don't want to be involved in this project because I don't, care for the position that you're taking or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
You could turn down work. And I think often that particularly unpopular things are turned down by certain firms. There are niche areas and there are highly specialized areas and places where a lot of these firms have a monopoly on a skill set.
Yeah.
And so they just wouldn't take the case, right?
Yeah.
And so now when those policies have to be fought before the courts, right? They're being represented by less optimal representation, which
Mm-hmm.
because it's not just we want you to stop doing your DEI, because that's ostensibly what's happening, right? We want you to stop.
That's a whole other
Yeah, but is the deal is also that each of these firms that has signed a deal or whatever is going to provide over the next 4 years pro bono work totaling an amount that is in the whatever agreement, and that amount is for two of the firms $100 million. So $240 million worth of free work.
Yeah.
For what is my question? And why does the administration want to bank this stuff?
Right.
What's it going to spend it on?
Right.
Is what's really worrying me. And
Good question.
And by the way, they can always go back to the well and be
that's when you started down this path, that's exactly what I was thinking is, so when these bills get submitted and they get to 99,800, whatever, you know what I mean? Who in the White House is going to be
stop, can't use that anymore.
hold on a minute. Nope, you overcharged me on this, but you know what I mean?
Or they just go back and say it's $150 million now.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. That's
what are you
I'm
going to do about
saying.
It? What are you going to do about it?
This is such a
it's by the way, the pro bono, so each of the firms has said, and to their credit, and I will, I'll take them at their word on this, that their deal did not involve them giving away their ability of their individual pro bono committees to exercise discretion over what matters they take. But if you don't think that the pressure of this thing, which each of these firms has described as fatal, is going to weigh on them when maybe a very ugly or nasty pro bono matter is thrust upon them by the administration or the campaign or personal individuals connected with, that's a possibility that exists now that didn't exist before this. And none of this is you can't sue to enforce this if you're the law firm, and there's nothing stopping the government from renegotiating anytime they want.
Right.
So it's what it ends up being is a blanket do not represent interests that are adverse to those of the administration, and you will also give us $100 million worth of free work over 4 years for things that we're going to tell you to work on.
Right.
And that's just
Insane.
Weird.
Insane.
And I don't know. And I'm sure everyone involved will say, no, we have our own independence. That's not the deal that we made. That is just what it looks like, though.
And on the other side of that, to take away from the woe is us law firms side of it, is that real people who oppose the government or who the president sees as a threat, if they get wrapped up in a lawsuit that involves the government in some way, shape, or form, suddenly these big law firms are no longer available to them.
Yeah, and that seems to be, and not to be cynical here, but that seems to be the split among these firms, is kind of the nature of the work that they're exposed to. If your clients are a lot of federal contractors, for example, and the government comes telling you, we're going to yank every one of those contracts if you don't do what we say. I mean, that's a gun to your head from a business standpoint. And then you got to make whatever choice you're going to make in that scenario.
Yeah, it is Pandora's box. And, thank you to the firms that are fighting this, because there has to be some precedence that, this is insane. Insane.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy, man. And by the way, if they were super concerned with these things, the administration would not be settling. Like, if that's, you know what I mean? Like, it's
right. So yeah. So
also like you're allowed to be unethical now. It's like okay.
as long as you give us free. Yeah. No, oh my gosh, I hadn't even thought of that.
Yeah. So it's like it's pretextual. You know. It's that's how you know.
I was like, let's just touch on this real quick at the end, and it's like. You can't touch on it quick. It's too important. I just want to, I think my point in bringing it up was not only to just show support and you know, to the extent we're able, like, make our opinions known, but also, like, to kind of bring a little bit more awareness that this isn't a woe is me lawyer issue. This is a much broader issue. And to the extent people don't realize that, you need to read up on this a little bit and understand the effects this has on everyday people and their ability to get legal representation. That is the scary part. All right, well, there's, I guess, no good way to end this conversation. It probably isn't. It's not going to end. It's going to continue. But yeah, we had to touch on it, and that's our position. And just, you know, keep educating yourself on these things, and we'll end on a happier note.
Yeah. All right, a little palate cleanser before we get off here. This is like I found this hysterical, and we're just gonna play it here at the end. Here, there was an individual, he had an employment case. The facts of the case are not super important. What's important is he was pro se and was representing himself in the First Judicial Department of the Supreme Court of the State of New York. And New York's courts are organized so weird.
I think that's a trial court level.
Yeah, right.
Supreme Court is trial.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So don't. Yeah, but anyways, he's pro se, so he doesn't have a lawyer, and then he starts playing a video of an AI attorney, and gets. We'll listen to it first because I just think just listening to it is hilarious to me.
DeWalt versus Mass Mutual is being called out of turn, and the appellant has submitted a video for his argument. Okay, we will hear that video now.
May it please the court. I come here today a humble pro se before a panel of 5 distinguished justices.
Is this hold on. Is that counsel for the case?
I generated that.
I'm sorry?
I generated that. That is not a real person.
Okay, it would have been nice to know that when you made your application.
I think we can cut it there.
You did not.
So that's basically it. This is we've covered like the attempts at AI lawyers and everything, and like here's a good one, and it's within about 6 seconds the judge is just like absolutely not. This is. I love the may it please the court. I am a humble pro se, and it's like fake AI. This is not how anyone talks. And then and the claimant goes, no, I generated that. I'm sorry, that's mine. Yeah, and the judge is like, never mind then. We're not going to do that. I just, yep. So anytime you see people that are that have a like quote unquote AI lawyer service, or they're talking about how attorneys are going to be automated or whatever, here's Exhibit A for you.
Good attempt.
Good try.
Shut it down.
Yep.
All right, that's our show. As a reminder, we come out with new episodes every 2 weeks, pending our litigation schedules, but we do our best. You can find Litigation Nation wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. So please tune in, leave comments, anything you want us to cover that we haven't yet. That's it. We'll see you next time.